Welcome, everyone, to Alaska Quarterly Review's reading series available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Please feel free to watch any of our prior programs and to share them. Alaska Quarterly Review is committed to presenting these programs without charge and to showcase vibrant and diverse new and emerging voices and literary conversations with depth, complexity, and humanity. I am Ronald Spatz, Editor-in-Chief of Alaska Quarterly Review, and before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgments. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land, and land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement toward decolonization and equity. And now to today's program featuring poet A.E. Hines. A.E. Hines is the author of two poetry collections, Adam in the Garden, Charlotte Lit Press, 2024, and Any Dumb Animal, Main Street Rag, 2021. He has won the Red Wheelbarrow Prize and the Palette Poetry Love and Eros Prize, and has been a finalist for the Montreal International Poetry Prize. In addition to Alaska Quarterly Review, his poems can be found in many journals, including The Sun, Southern Review, Rattle, Prairie Schooner, and New Letters. A.E. currently teaches poetry for Charlotte's Center for Literary Arts. For more information, you can check his website, www.aehines.net. And now it's my pleasure to welcome A.E. Hines.
Thank you, Ron. It's such a joy to be here. I want to thank Alaska Quarterly and you particularly for all that you do, not only for the journal, but for our poetry community at large. I know it seems like it's a particularly tough time for journals all across the country right now, and many have had to fold up shop. So it's invaluable, the work that you all do. And as poets and readers of poetry and lovers of poetry, we really appreciate it. Thanks to the museum and to Danny for helping out today with production for this. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to read several poems from my latest collection that just came out from Charlotte Lit Press entitled Adam in the Garden. And we'll talk about a few of those poems as I go. Astronauts. It was dangerous then, making love in a Carolina backyard. First, the hammock threatened to flip us to the ground, taking with it my nerve. Then you gasped at the sudden reach of my hand, which woke your fear, but not our classmates asleep inside. I spread a blanket and we undressed, silent, back to back, much like we would have in the locker room, each man neatly piling his clothes in opposing corners. The night was clear, the sky knitted with stars. We floated toward each other. Summer astronauts on our first expedition, at first clumsy in our experiments, each of us taking our time as fireflies circled our naked bodies like blinking satellites or distant moons. Each of us edging closer to discovery we could not yet name. So that was my opening poem in the new collection, which is interesting in that much of the book takes place outdoors. It's called Adam in the Garden, and where the garden tends to be a stand-in for the literal gardens and outdoors, but also planet Earth and the climate. And Adam tends to be mankind or me and my own life experiences. This second poem that I'll read was at first appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review. So my thanks for first giving it a home. And many of these poems, as you'll find, were written. I live part-time in Medellin, Colombia, in the mountains of the Andes. And that became a real inspiration for the book because so much of the imagery is drawn from here. And it really does feel like a Garden of Eden. So this second poem addresses that, and it's called Breakfast in South America. A great blue-green bird follows me down into the garden this morning, darting from cypress to pine, sounding 4 sacred notes that echo up through the ravine like ancient calls to prayer. It's easy to stop and place a mango on the low stone wall, to watch him watching me watch him eat it. I don't know the bird's name. Neon blue oval crowning his head, silver green teardrop at the tip of his tail. But each morning I walk out to find him waiting among the soft ringlets of pale green moss dripping from the trees. See beneath them new roots raking through the dark earth like God's own fingers. It's hard this morning to see the fresh orchids, speckled yellow and pinks bubbling up from the trunks, to see this bird propped among the red gold bromeliads still fusing with the branches, to remember this bright world, blue and green, is dying. Incarnation. Before the body, Father, I was the lust in your myopic eye. Sigh of that coy child, the lunch counter waitress who fetched you coffee and fried egg sandwiches for the months it took her to decide. Back then, I was still dust, ash rising in my own private universe of chlorophyll and sun until I was the dust sucked up into her cornbread and boiled okra. Odds and ends she used to weave me into me. Tootsie Rolls and peanut butter cups. Sun-steeped iced tea she balanced on her ripening belly as I quietly willed myself into flesh. You think you made me, Father? Taking that girl, slight and virginal, wedding her across state lines where officials asked no questions, then breaking her like a horse when she begged for tenderness, pleading for a hospital when the bleeding wouldn't stop. They say the dead should hold their peace, but what do they say of the not yet breathing, who stand and watch from the gate, who fall backwards into this world from their wombs to open their mouths and speak? Here's another Edenic poem sponsored or inspired by the environment. Adam before Eve. Adam too walked alone in the garden, feeding and naming the birds. This was before Eve, before the weather changed and the leaves began to fall, before Adam hid his dangling bits and the down sprouting between his legs. I wonder if he could feel the coming change, marrow thickening in his hastily assembled bones, which days before had been drawn from the river of light. Did he notice the newborn sun setting earlier each evening, or the damp smell of rot overtaking his roses? Adam gave up on paradise too soon, started building parking lots and condos, strip malls and atom bombs, stopped going out each morning to shoo that sweet talking serpent from his yard. Too late, once the snake's legs fell off. 4 strange ornaments left hanging in that abandoned tree. So in the summer, around the country, we have lots of Pride Month celebrations going on. And during Pride Month and the summer and various events going on, I often like to stop and think about the people that aren't with us. And here's a poem that addresses that. It's called Postcard from the Dead. 10 years later, my killers, interviewed from their cells, will say Matthew Shepard needed killing. 10 years after that, my people lay my ashes to rest in the shining Capitol, under the stone ceiling of a vaulted cathedral, far from the fence in that naked winter field, from the icy prison of Wyoming. My killers thought I'd be forgotten when they offered me a ride, then bound my hands and placed that filthy bag over my head. But for 20 years, for 30, far longer than I was alive, our people remember my name. It blooms from their lips like a cold prairie rose. Eden. I recall placing ripe plantain on the lowest branch of eucalyptus, and the tree filling with small wings, toucans and motmots, a flock of miniature finches dusted with pale blue chalk. There are so few days I would, if I could, set on repeat and live over and over. Here, the man I love, sight of him a reviving breath, carrying plates of chorizo and fried eggs. Then the two of us reclined in dappled grass, drinking hot chocolate from a single chipped cup beneath prehistoric ferns that tower and sway just as they must have, with the world still new. I like to pretend then too, didn't I, that we were the first and last of our kind, a multitude of wings beating the air under a sun that never set, our queer, middle-aged bodies, never a day older. This book, I'm in my early 50s now, and so a lot of the poems, and we'll talk about a couple that they tend to vacillate back in time to my upbringing in the rural South, as well as sort of places I've lived since leaving the South when I was a young man. Here's one from a younger time. It's called Family History. The way my mother tells it, I ran away. She didn't shove me out the front door at 16. Afterwards, she remembers my little sister possessed by a poisonous anger, but has no recollection of dragging her through the house by her hair. The history of our family was oral, repeated to herself in the splotched bathroom mirror, where everything came out backwards. Backwards, everything came out of that mirror, where she repeated our family history with no recollection of dragging my sister through the house by her hair, of her own poisonous anger, or me at 16, pleading at our front door. She didn't shove me. I ran away. One thing about being in your 50s is you really start to look more wistfully at your 20s. Here's a poem from that time. It's called Sacramento, 1994. My neighbor wasn't wrong that Sunday she called the cops. Said she feared the young man upstairs murdered by some other man. I did die that summer, 100 tiny deaths, and cremated my shame. When I opened my door, two lady officers stood badged in black, one waving a finger at my half-open boxers, at my guest who came and wrapped his arm around my waist wearing nothing but a towel. Was it wrong to climb the trellis of each man's body like a vine? I wanted to leap off and fly the wide open sky of my own body that summer, to Peter Pan my way through every coffee shop and light-dazzled bar. So when the cop said, "You boys go right on having a wonderful day," we did. Their black and white pulled away, and I leaned out my second-story window, two strong hands gripping the sun-baked sill, opened the grateful cavity of my throat and crowed. No small happiness. To imagine the earth will go on without us brings me no small happiness. And with little faith in God, modest comfort to believe I might escape further judgment. After all, what would either of us have to say? Even as my son hugs me goodbye this morning, I know the ways I've failed him, how we all keep failing, the planet's inheritance already squandered. They say all a man has in the end are his memories, but I won't take even these into oblivion. No need for an afterlife. Endless time to climb the same regretful stairs, reliving a life I've shoved like a grand piano into a room too small to hold it. Such a pleasure to know I'll be gone, whittled away to nothing, and yet still crawling in whatever low creature survives in this world to crawl. Cockroach and silverfish, the simple ant. Why does it bring me such peace, this notion of disappearing? To know when Jesus spoke of the meek, he didn't mean us. I'm going to read one final poem, and it's not from the book. It actually is in the most recent issue of Alaska Quarterly. So my thanks to Ron and guest editor Danusha Lamaris for including this poem. And thanks again to Danny and to Ron for having me. It's a real pleasure. This last poem is called Dusk. When the neighbor's dog at last stops barking, there's a brief sense of relief, as if an insistent whirring fan has yammered through the air so long it's now imperceptible, the mind having learned to ignore it. But my ears still carry the weight, still ache for this silence, and I lie a while in the gap, as evening comes into the fading purple sky, recline in the low arm of a sycamore until stillness gives way to restless chatter behind my eyes. The same old self I mistake myself to be. A name, a history, a dog-loving man who could, for a moment, wish the dog of another man harm. What a relief. The night's first nightjar calling in the branches, churring its goodnight. A few crickets warm up their tiny bows in the bushes. When the dog starts again, all I am is sight and sound, this dim sense of longing beneath the light of long dead stars. Thank you very much.